guess that's myself afraid I was looking for this light that this
You know what?
basically.
Maybe we can resolve.
Let's go on there.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Lynn Lawson. Is this on? Can you hear me? I can hear you.
I can.
I don't know what's on. This being the last Sunday of the month, it's Lay Sunday. I'm a lay person, and I'll lead the service with my sister, lay sister Ellie Blatchley, giving the sermon. Please come downstairs for coffee hour after the service. I have one very important announcement, and that is that there will be no church service next Sunday, July 4th. Instead, on Saturday and Sunday, there will be several church-sponsored activities, including an outdoor hymn sing and a takeout pulled pork supper as part of the Peacham July 4th celebrations. So please see the bulletin for a schedule and details, and try to attend these events. Are there any other announcements? Anne?
Yeah, on Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, we're going together to call Strawberries. If there's anybody that would like to help, your help would be greatly appreciated. And we also go dice up the potatoes on Friday. Whether I get that done in the forenoon or whether it goes to afternoon, I don't know. This work to be done on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, to say the least, to make this a success.
Okay, and anybody who didn't hear, she's asking for help on Friday at 1 o'clock to hull the fresh strawberries for the strawberry shortcake, and also to help mash some potatoes.
Dice.
Dice the potatoes later on in the afternoon. That's Friday. Yeah.
So look at the back and under the announcements. So the third is the pageant, which is the hymn sing. That's going to take in place of the Sunday service. And then the pulled pork dinner is on Sunday from 4 until 6.
4 to 6.
4 to 6.
And how do people get tickets for that?
You don't need tickets, just show up. We have some people calling in and reserving dinners. It's a full kind of dinner package. It's not a sit down here. Who are the neighbors over here? I'm sorry.
The signers?
The signers?
Signers.
Sorry. The signers are actually putting up a tent for a mock wedding that they're doing. And they said they would love to leave the tent up for us for the hymn sing on Saturday and for the pulled pork dinner on Sunday. So we'll also be, I guess, setting up maybe some tables and chairs over there. So you'll pick up your pulled pork dinner here. It's all to go. Pick it up here if you want to eat it locally. You can hopefully just go into the tent or find a spot out here. Unfortunately, our picnic tables have gone away. But decide what you want to do, or you can take it home and have a lovely picnic at home.
Thank you. That's 4 to 6 on Sunday.
4 to 6.
And
Yeah, and reservations can also be called to me or to Mail and Magnus. So if you want to make sure you get tickets, please call and make reservations. I have an answer machine on my phone and Marilyn does on hers. So.
okay, call
I think I got about 25 reservations in already, so.
Call Ann or Marilyn Magnus for a reservation. Yes, Barry.
Yes, since we're speaking of Kathy Steiner, one other thing we can express gratitude to her for is that her lawn is going to be used for the annual horseshoe train. And a lot of people don't know about that, but you do now. And they said it's on Sunday morning at 8:30, and as I say, be there, be square. The last few years, the signers have graciously allowed us to use the area for horseshoe pits, and we appreciate it. However, there are a lot of other things going on, and I don't know to what degree people are aware of Sundays in Peacham, but a lot of people around town down the road or from other states and so forth. And just because there are people who have devoted many, many hours to organize this, I would like to encourage people to take advantage of that and express the gratitude to people, not only here in the church, but other places, within the farmers market and the open houses. A lot of work has gone into it, and we need to support it.
Yes, John?
3 announcements. Children's Center, we're very close and expect to sign the license agreement this week. The play area, we heard your feedback following the service last week. There isn't much enthusiasm for locating the play area in the middle of the parking lot, so we're searching for other solutions. Frankly, there's no perfect solution, but your input is welcome. And if you were at the council meeting, as many of you were, following the service last week, I mentioned to the council members that we expected to move sooner than the next council meeting to address the boundary issue for the Bungus property. We met with our surveyor and with Nancy Lou and Juliet this week. The short story is that the line of the boundary goes much closer to their house than any of us thought. I think most of us think the line runs at the western end of the ramp and lawn. We've reached an agreement in principle, at least a recommendation to the council, that the line, a boundary adjustment agreement should be made to put the line there and to address the fact that the land records show that they don't have an easement for the driveway or the septic tank. I will be seeking the council's approval, probably by unanimous consent through email in the near future. I'm happy to show you the pins if you have any viewpoints on what we should do. But the recommendation is that we should reach an agreement to locate the boundary where I think we all think it should be.
Thank you, John. Yes, Nancy?
Please look for the 2 birthday cards on the table on the right as you go into the social hall and sign them. They are unfortunately belated, but we're getting back on track here.
Anyone else have any announcements? Yes, Tim?
Announcement about announcements. On the back, if you have announcements that you'd like included, they could be farmers market announcements or whatever. My email is there for the church. I will be glad to put those in there so we can make our announcement time a little bit shorter. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, now we'll start our formal period of worship with the prelude. months, Reverend Sonia has been speaking a lot about hospitality, how this congregation can be more welcoming to our community. This morning we're expanding that community to include animals, plants, birds, even bugs. St. Francis of Assisi, who had a deep love for nature and animals, said, "If you have men who will exclude any of God's creatures from the shelter of compassion and pity, you will have men who will deal likewise with their fellow men." In other words, people who don't care about the non-human population we share with Earth are likely to be equally careless about their fellow humans. St. Francis of Assisi actually preached to birds and animals. To me, that looks like radical hospitality. Let's begin the service with worship. Let's begin the worship with music. Hymn number 548. Your bulletin is a little transpose there. It's number 548, and I'll read the first verse. Safely through another week, God has brought us on our way. Let us now a blessing seek, waiting in his courts today. Day of all the week, the best, emblem of eternal rest. Number 548. now's the time to call to mind people in our congregation, in our community of friends and neighbors, in our families, who are struggling with life right now. Do you know anyone that needs the prayers of our congregation? Tim?
Again, it's the ongoing saga of our friend Marie. She ended up back in the ER again with another infection, which is, they just can't seem to get a handle on. And then our daughter ended up in the ER on Saturday morning with this, she hasn't had it since high school or college, but this kind of cramping and nausea and vomiting and all sorts of, sorry, too graphic. Anyway, she's back home, she's feeling much better, and she finally got some food into herself.
What's your daughter's name?
Hannah.
Holly?
Hannah.
Hannah. Oh, Hannah, of course. Sorry. Anybody else? Yes, Paul.
On the happy side, I have a nephew, Caleb, and he was chosen for all the submissions for the Dutch stamp for the state of Massachusetts. He's an artist.
Yes, Nancy.
I have a celebration on behalf of the school and the wonderful work that was done by the community and the school and the kids and the parents yesterday on the bread oven there. I know Jean was there, I'm not sure anyone else. Dave Edwards was there, and in our household was there, and it's a very exciting thing which we're all going to be able to use eventually. So thanks to all and thanks to God.
Yes, Sharon.
This is a happy thing. As you know, Garrett is at, what is it?
Norwich County.
Norwich, thank you. I've seen him on it. Anyway, he was chosen to go for the 2-week, they play soldier, and unfortunately, he's down in Tennessee, which must be miserable. But because he was chosen for this, he now will be offered a contract with what he wants, which is Air Force. So he will sign the contract, and then when he graduates, off he goes to the Air Force, the commission. So, but Garrett loves this stuff. I guess at the very end we'll use real guns, but in the beginning they're paintball guns. And he is really a dead shot. And I'll bet you there's going to be a lot of other kids with paintball all over him. But he was looking forward to it.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Okay, let's take a few moments in silent prayer for Marie and Hannah, and also to celebrate with Caleb, the school and the bread oven, and Garrett, and everyone in our church family we can all use a prayer. Now, please pray with me the Lord's Prayer, that beloved prayer that has comforted and healed so many people, and that people all over the world are praying with us this morning. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the responsive greeting in your bulletin. It carries on this morning's theme of hospitality towards creatures. It's called Plants and Animals in the Garden. Plants and animals in the garden, we welcome you. We invite you in. We ask your forgiveness and your understanding.
Little sparrows, quail, robins, and house finches who have died in our strawberry nets.
Earwigs, cutworms, millipedes, and other insects whom we have lured and stopped.
Snakes and moths who have been caught in our water system and filled our waters.
Families of mice who have died in irrigation pipes, by electricity in our pump box, and by predators while nesting in our greenhouses.
Worms and earthworms, severed by spades, and numerous microscopic life forms in our compost system who have been burned by sunlight.
Deer chased at dawn and at midnight, routed by dogs, by farmers, by fences, and numerous barriers.
Plants, colored lettuces, young broccoli, ripe strawberries, and sweet apples, and all plants we have shunned, poison hemlock, pigweed, limeweed, stinging nettle, old thistle,
And poison ivy. We call up all plants we have removed by dividing you and separating you and deciding you no longer grow well here.
We invoke you and thank you and continue to learn from you.
We dedicate this ceremony to you. We will continue to practice with you and for you. Amen. The mission for June, and I'm going to correct the bulletin here, the mission for June is the Missionary Fund of the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, NACCC. This missionary fund supports several charitable organizations around the country. One of these is called Seafarer's Friend, which is based in Massachusetts. Volunteers welcome and host the crews of incoming cargo ships, offering phone cards to call their families, land transportation, and pastoral care. I used to do this work in the harbor when I was living in Boston. Another charity that NACCC supports is the Maine Seacoast Mission. These volunteers strengthen coastal and island communities by fixing up houses and providing basic health care, elder care, and scholarships for kids. If you'd like to support this missionary fund, write Missionary Fund on your check and put it in the collection plate. We'll take the collection now with much gratitude. The next hymn is hymn number 41, and again I'll read the first verse. Children of the Heavenly Father, children of the Heavenly Father, safely in his bosom gather, nestling bird nor star in heaven, such a refuge e'er was given. Number 41.
Safely in his bosom gather.
for today. Ellie Blatchley. Ellie? Just pointing you out. Ellie Blatchley is a Vermonter who grew up in Calais on a dairy farm that became a sheep farm that became a theater, the Unadilla Theater. Ellie's father ran this theater, and Ellie was a frequent actor. Still does.
Age 97.
At age 97, still runs the Unadilla Theater. Ellie's married to Bruce Westcott, our pianist and organist, and several years ago, Bruce accompanied Ellie to England, where Ellie had enrolled in a furniture restoration and conservation program. She apprenticed there with a master upholsterer, which explains why she's renowned in Vermont and in other places farther away for her outstanding skill in upholstery. She has a shop right up the street. During their first week living in a little village in England, Ellie and Bruce were invited to attend the little local village church, where the congregation quickly latched on to both of them, Ellie for the choir and Bruce as an altar person. So that when they moved to Peacham over a year ago, it was natural for them to check out our church and natural for them to love it here and become members. The scriptural selection is from Genesis. When I was hunting in the Bible for an appropriate scriptural selection, a passage to introduce Ellie's sermon, I came across something surprising and exciting, something I had never noticed before in Scripture. It's in Genesis, and it concerns the covenant that God made with Noah after the flood. The Lord had given up on depraved humanity, you'll remember that story, and wanted to make a fresh start with the good man Noah and his family and an ark full of animals and birds. When the flood was over, God makes a covenant with Noah. God promises that from then on, God will preserve the living earth and never again destroy it wholesale. Let me read 4 short verses describing this covenant. This is from the King James Version in Genesis. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there be any more a flood to destroy the earth. There are 8 covenants described in the Scriptures, promises, implicit or explicit, that God makes with groups of people. The remarkable covenant with Noah includes not just people, but every living creature. At least 4 times God mentions every living creature. Bible scholars recognize the uniqueness of this covenant as the only one that aims to preserve and prosper the whole creation. Not just the Jews, not just the Christians, not just humans, all things, all living things. So St. Francis, in his love for creatures, wasn't just following his own personal inclination. He was perfectly in sync with what he knew profoundly about his Creator's love for the fauna and the flora. And now, Ellie will tell us not only how we can honor the divine concern for birds and animals, but why we must.
It all began with my birthday, May 2nd. The hub went up to St. Johnsbury to get me a gift the day before, and, as I picture it, wandered around the shopping district looking for inspiration. I imagine he thought a cup of coffee would help, and there was that bookstore with coffee as well, so that works. Then I imagine he saw a nice blue cover with a bird on it. Thought, the wife will like that, it's got a bird on the cover. wife has been binging on books on ecology and listening to lectures on soil biology ever since. The book is Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation in your yard by Doug Ptolemy, who is an entomologist teaching at the University of Delaware. He has a new way of looking at the climate crisis. He sees this crisis on an intimate scale for two reasons. One, who the heck can relate to the environment? And two, the only impact we can really have is on our own immediate surroundings. In other words, my environment, your environment. It's so true. I care the most about my 2.91 acre environment. And it's the only environment over which I have control. His good news is that we can, in fact, have an impact by focusing on our own yards. He asks us to look at our yards from a new perspective. Not whether it is beautiful, but whether it is ecologically productive. Is it feeding the insects and birds we want to see in our yards? 90% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned land, and most of it's small yards, like mine. If we join them up, it would become a national park of millions of acres. He calls this a homegrown national park. A large part of the book is about defining the problem, which is loss of biological diversity. Why does diversity matter? It matters because of the interrelatedness of plants and animals. Plants and animals interact in ways that feed each other, which we used to call the food chain, but now they call the food web, because it is so much more complex than we thought. We know something's wrong, because the insects and birds are disappearing. The monarch butterfly population has dropped a staggering 96%. It doesn't take much imagination to see that there's no way a species can replace itself at that rate. Replacement is the key. Fluctuations are normal, a boom and bust cycle depending on resources, but all boom, all bust, and no boom is what's happening now. Our insect populations have dropped 57% since 1989. And since insects are food for nearly every animal, this is a catastrophic problem. A lot of animals eat insects that would surprise you. 25% of a bear's diet is insects. For most birds, caterpillars are the only food for baby birds because a caterpillar is squishy and mostly fat. One caterpillar has the nutritive value of 200 aphids. So just imagine how much more efficient that is for foraging. In one study, a researcher was able to prove that chickadee parents feed a nest of 5 to 6 nestlings, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars in the first 16 days after hatching. They need to find those caterpillars within about 50 feet of the nest. The specific issue here is food for all those caterpillars. What has happened to their food source? A number of things: cutting down habitat, replacing it with dead zones called lawn, non-native species, which they cannot eat, taking over where edible native species were, and of course the pesticides on farms and lawns that kills the insects outright. Nearly half of the pesticide use in this country is on lawns. One of the problems that bugs have is that most of them are specialists. They co-evolve to eat specific leaves, not just any leaf. They had to do this because plants are madly working to prevent their leaves from being eaten, which they do with nasty chemicals that taste terrible or are downright lethal, since they need their leaves to photosynthesize. So caterpillars co-evolve to produce their own specific enzymes that allow them to munch specific leaves and not die. It sounds incredible, but it's true. That is why non-native plants are so devastating. Nobody here can eat them. In their homelands, these plants are food because those insects there have co-evolved to eat their leaves. Here they have no predators, they leap out earlier than native plants and crowd out native species. It takes thousands of years for this co-evolution to happen, and we don't have that kind of time. This author is the first person to explain why non-native plants are such a problem that I've encountered. A prime example of this is the Japanese honeysuckle. It crowds out every native plant. Even its prolific berries provide the wrong thing in the fall. Sugar, when migrating birds need fat. My son-in-law, a naturalist, recently told me about his effort to remove honeysuckle from the shore of Waterbury Reservoir. After several years, he succeeded. Now that area hosts 40 plant species, and now there are all kinds of butterflies that were not there before. So restoration works. On a side note, another thing I learned from him, migration. Why do birds migrate? I never thought about that before. The answer is that it is worthwhile. Where they winter, they can only find enough food to raise 2 to 3 babies. Up here in the deciduous forests, there is an explosion of caterpillars in the spring where they can raise a clutch of 5 to 6. That small difference is enough to justify the risks of migration. If there aren't enough caterpillars, will our state bird even bother to come? Of the native species of plants, some are keystone species because they are so much more ecologically productive than others. An oak tree hosts over 500 species of caterpillar compared to a ginkgo, which hosts 0. The ginkgo is beautiful, though. Thus, you can see that native is not the only consideration, but how much life does a plant host? Most home landscaping starts with an expanse of lawn dotted with ornamental plantings, trees and shrubs spaced out like polka dots. So, reverse that plan. Think of your yard as mostly plantings, with planned out lawns and paths. Let there be layers of plants, both vertical and horizontal, to create a depth of habitat that allows different birds to occupy their preferred layer. Tall trees, tall shrubs, short shrubs. Let there be plants that produce nutritious berries in the fall. The native plants produce nutritious berries with fat for that fall migration. One of the things we know is that the smaller the habitat, the less safe it is for birds. A row of trees is less safe than a small copse of trees and shrubs. That three-dimensional understory is critical to every form of wildlife. What we see as messy and disorderly, a bird or bat sees as life-giving. It's time to see the landscape with the eyes of a caterpillar. The life cycle of caterpillars is very relevant to how we landscape with trees. The caterpillar climbs or drops down onto the ground when it is ready to pupate. When it hits the ground, it has to quickly burrow into the soil before something eats it. How can it do that if it falls onto compacted lawn, or worse, impermeable plastic fabric? Soil compaction under trees is a major problem for insects. Raise the height of your lawnmower to allow for toads to emerge in the spring. That's for fall. And give a thought to moths and other nighttime insects. When they bang around and die our outdoor lights, they are not doing what they need to be doing, which is feeding, pollinating, reproducing, and laying eggs that become caterpillars. Nobody knows why they are so attracted to light. The solution is so absurdly simple. Install yellow light bulbs or motion detectors. This book is a real education on how things work in the natural world. Plants are no longer simply ornaments, but good hosts or poor hosts. Are there holes in the leaves? Yay! Some caterpillars found food, and a baby bird will live another day. After that, I read Finding the Mother Tree by the scientist Suzanne Simard. She is a forest ecologist who discovered the real purpose of the fungi under the forest floor, for trees to share resources. She grew up in British Columbia to a multi-generational family of loggers. Her first job was working for the Forest Service, researching how to help seedlings grow better for the cash crops of fir and pine. What she discovered is revolutionary. The trees actually share resources rather than compete through a network of fungi that live on the roots of trees. Carbon and nitrogen are converted to sugar by photosynthesis, sent down to the roots, and then mycorrhizal fungi colonize these roots, spreading out to neighboring trees. My vocabulary really increased since May 2nd. The bigger the tree, the bigger the root system. The bigger the root system, the more carbon is stored in the biggest ones she calls mother trees. The root system of a tree is 3 times the size of what we see above ground. She proved the exact mechanism of how this happens, and her descriptions of her experiments to prove it are really fantastic. Her next step was to convince the logging industry that the standard approach of cut, poison, and replant was giving them sick trees and erosion. The preconception is strong that plants compete for resources and never cooperate. She has proven otherwise. Looking at a forest of trees all crowded together and thriving, it seems obvious that this is the case. But she had to prove it scientifically. She has now initiated the Mother Tree Project to teach foresters about how trees can be planted in a way that helps the cash crop thrive while sequestering the most amount of carbon. She is a pioneer in this great realm below the surface, and she's a really good writer. Once I learned about the fungi under the surface, one thing leads to another. I began to look at my very anemic-looking vegetable garden and wonder, does this stuff happen with garden vegetables too? Well, that brought on a crash course on soil ecology. I came across another pioneer, Dr. Elaine Ingham. She began studying soil microbiology in the late 70s at a time when the microbes in the soil were just there, Elaine. They don't do anything. She wasn't satisfied with that answer and now has spent her whole life studying precisely what these microbes do. A plant, even a vegetable in your garden, takes carbon out of the air, converts it to sugars and carbohydrates, and sends it down to the roots. It exudes this stuff out of its roots. And that's called an exudate. Ah, what a great word. Meanwhile, bacteria and fungi in the soil have been breaking down dirt into its periodic table of nutrients. They congregate around the roots, eating up the sugars. Nematodes and protozoa then eat the bacteria and fungi, and when they poop, nutrients in that poop are now water-soluble and available to the plant. The plant absorbs these nutrients and grows. Dr. Ingham says that all dirt on this planet contains all the nutrients to grow plants, regardless of where on the planet. This is a surprise, even a desert. The challenge is, how can those nutrients become available to the plant's roots? The secret lies in plants themselves. Plant roots themselves create an environment that releases the nutrients, a lot like a coral reef creates an environment for an entire ecosystem. It's incredibly similar in its shape, even. The addition of pesticides, you can now see, kills the very organisms that would be doing that work. Her life goal now is teaching farmers and vegetable gardens how this biology works, and especially how to use a microscope. Farmers need to know what biological activity is in their soil. Good soil contains a balance, about 50-50, of bacteria and fungi, with lots of air pockets. Tilling and plowing destroy the very structure that feeds the roots of the plants. And, of course, leads to erosion, compaction, and overheating of the soil. Bare soil on a hot summer's day can easily be 107 degrees, 120, but microbes, it turns out, function best at the same temperature that we like, 75 degrees. Cover crops and mulch keep the soil cool and moist for the busy, hard-working microbes. The roots of a cover crop provide the structure for healthy soil, which has lots of nooks and crannies. The longer the plant grows, the longer its roots grow, and the more it builds that coral reef sort of shape in the soil. Did you know that a ryegrass plant can grow roots to a depth of 4 feet in only 3 months? If left to grow, it will grow to a depth of 15 feet or more. This is a ryegrass. That's why she recommends the perennial cover crops over annual, because their roots keep growing and growing. One of the challenge for farmers is that it looks messy to see plants instead of bare ground between the rows. Instinct tells them that cover crops are stealing the resources. And yet, once again, the reality is that plants cooperate. It's like a giant commodities exchange down there. To see with new eyes, that is the challenge. Once the profits start rolling in, the eyes have made the adjustment. They will have spent nothing on fertilizer and pesticides, yet have greater yields and much less work to do, and they will sequester a lot of carbon in the process. Another book I read is Wilding, and this came into my hands quite randomly by Bruce McLean. I was blabbing on about this book, and he said, "Oh, here, take this." Oh my gosh, what a great book, an amazing writer. She and her husband live on a 3,500-acre estate in Sussex, south of England, and after generations of industrial wheat farming on clay soils and facing bankruptcy, they threw in the towel on farming. They decided to turn their farm over to nature and see what happens. 3,500 acres. But because it had been managed by humans for so long, with pesticides and all that stuff, what did nature mean exactly? So they researched what England might have looked like before human agriculture arrived. They found themselves plopped in the middle of a great debate. It used to be covered completely with trees, a closed canopy from the tip of Spain to the northern tip of Scotland. After all, only 8,000 years ago, the English Channel was land. The debate hinged on this. There was very little grass pollen in the fossil record, only tree pollen. But as it turns out, grass pollen is by its nature ephemeral. So the whole closed canopy theory had a massive hole. Isabella and her husband decided to restore a mixed landscape of grassland, scrub, and forest. They brought in Old English longhorn cattle, the closest equivalent to the aurochs, or original cattle, a breed that forages on many plants, not just grass. They brought in Exmoor ponies, which are the closest modern equivalent to the tarpan, that ancient horse you see in cave paintings. They brought in several types of deer. Each of these ungulates eats and poops in different ways that cause the plants to respond in different ways. They brought in tame pigs, which perturb the soil, allowing seeds to germinate. What resulted has been a complete success, as a multitude of rare insects and birds have found a home there. The now rare nightingale has always been presumed to be a woodland bird. The bird guide says so. Yet, once they had allowed the hedgerows to grow out to 25 feet wide, nightingales were coming to live in them. It turns out that the, quote, known habitat for a nightingale was based on a landscape that did not have what they liked best, which is scrub. That book is full of such discoveries. Both this author, Isabella Tree, and Doug Ptolemy raise the interesting question of conservation versus restoration. Conservation means hanging on to what is. But what do you do if there is no natural habitat to conserve? That is the case with most of Europe, and increasingly here. There's also the problem of shifting baselines, which is the idea that each generation, or half generation, the perception of normal amount of nature is getting smaller and smaller. Conservation just isn't getting the job done, as our terrible dwindling of species attests. We have to do things differently if we want different results. That starts with how we see. There's a saying that if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make big changes, change the way you see. It's time to start seeing native plants. more beautiful in our gardens, to see holes in the leaves as signs of life, to see plants growing between the rows as signs of a coral reef below the surface. And as you can see in this beautiful book, Native Plants of the Northeast by Don Leopold, our native plants are just as beautiful and exotic as the ones at the nursery. One of the things these pioneers have in common is that they see human beings as part of nature, not separate. Perhaps a strategic mistake of the conservation movement has been to suggest that we are antithetical to nature. Humans here, nature over there. Ptolemy really hammers home the idea that this is not productive. We can't save nature by putting it over there. There's simply not enough of it left. Besides which, we are part of nature, just as much as those caterpillars and microbes. Ptolemy is convincing in saying that we can live in harmony with the creatures that feed us in body and in soul. I got to thinking about our little church. I wonder how we could be radically hospitable, as in hosts in a fundamental way, to our little town. In Italy, a nursery school is called a nido, which is the Italian for nest. So Italians think of their children as nestlings. Suppose we had an ecology nido downstairs where Sunday school used to be, 9:15 to 10:30 on Sunday mornings, kitted out with microscopes and hand lenses. Maybe the parents could come upstairs instead of going home. Maybe we could set up a scholarship fund to send our local graduates to learn how to be trained in soil ecology at Dr. Ingham's school. Suppose we could host a native plant weekend. That would make some heads swivel, get people looking at the Congregational Church with new eyes. I know it's late, but I'd love to read just a little teeny weeny bit from this. Recently, a friend described her father as being a stereotypical proponent of traditional landscaping. To him, the ideal landscape looked just like his neighbor's yard. Beautiful, pruned and mowed, always perfect, and inanimate. A large, immaculate lawn was a sign of responsible neighborhood stewardship, a sign of a good citizen, a team player who was doing his or her part to maintain local property values. Needless to say, her father was not a member of the Bringing Nature Home choir. My friend did not share her father's landscaping values and often urged him to think beyond what plants looked like and consider instead what they could do for his neighbors, for his yard's watersheds, soil, pollinators, food webs, and carbon sequestration. Alas, he would have none of it, so she turned her attention elsewhere. Concerned about the rapid decline of monarch butterflies, she joined Monarch Watch, a national organization that promotes creation and restoration of monarch habitat. She planted milkweeds and asters in her yard, local parks, and other places. Finally, her father asked what was taking so much of her time. She explained that monarch populations had declined by more than 96% in 10 short years because of loss of habitat. A few days later, she was flabbergasted when she received a call from her father asking whether she would be willing to plant some milkweeds in his yard. In a few days, of course she said yes, in a few days her flabber was even more gasted when she started getting regular calls from her father. I saw a monarch! A monarch laid an egg! I don't think there's enough food for the monarch caterpillars. I need more milkweed plants. And so it went for the rest of the summer. He was hooked. Her father had transformed in mere days from someone utterly detached from the natural world to someone enthralled with it, all because he gained personal experience with the beautiful butterfly that is in trouble. He recognized that through his actions he had become part of the solution instead of part of the problem, and he felt good about that. Monarchs had awakened his paternal instincts, and he nurtured those beautiful creatures as if they were his own. He learned that his beloved monarchs could eat only milkweeds. His Asian ornamental species, his crepe myrtles and golden ring and blah, 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 provided nothing for them. The grass he once dutifully mowed weekly was an impediment to the milkweeds he needed for his monarchs. So he replaced some lawn with more milkweeds. Perhaps his greatest epiphany was realizing that if he could use his property to help save monarchs, he could also use it to save zebra swallowtails, Carolina chickadees, dozens of native bee species, and countless other creatures, all by adding plants on which these animals defend. My friend's father now is drawn into his yard, not by the competitive need to out-manicure the Joneses, but to learn to watch, to be fascinated and entertained. So the devil with the Joneses. His loyalty now lay with the monarchs.
First line of one of the hymns in our hymnals is, "It only takes a spark to get a fire going." We have a spark here. And we also have a basket of sparks down here. We brought in some yellow light bulbs for people to take home and replace your white light bulbs. As Ellie was describing, the yellow doesn't attract as many bugs as the white ones. So please feel free to take a bulb home. Now we'll sing hymn number 398. I'll read the first verse. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Number 398.
first line of this tune that you may even be familiar with asks the question, Skylark, have you anything to say to me?